Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by Pingdom and Monday.com. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is my co-host, Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I've got my sidecar all set up here. So, we talked about that last week, and I thought I ought to start using it a little bit more while I'm recording podcasts, because I like that idea, because there's usually so many windows that we have open when we're recording one of these shows. It's nice just to have Google Docs in a nice big window on my main screen and have all the other little bits off to the side. So that was that's been nice. But today I wanted to talk to you about email, because we
oh no
I do I want to talk about email. Well, you know what, it's funny because we talked about email way back, and I think it was episode 37, and we talked about what would be our ideal email client. And here we are almost, I don't know, 2 years later with I don't think any better solution.
Much older and wiser, really.
Yeah, well, I suppose when we get to the heart of this, maybe we are wiser, or maybe we're just still we're just flailing around looking for solutions is what I think is happening, because I don't think that the landscape of email apps has really gotten a whole lot better since we last talked about this.
No, it really hasn't. I think we're still stuck in this odd predicament of there's the traditional email client experience and there's the modern email experience. And I think, if anything, we've seen over the past couple of years this uptick of businessy, enterprisey type of email products that tend to serve a very specific market, that of large teams and companies that want to collaborate on email. And so we've seen things like Spark, or we've seen, and there was actually a whole privacy debacle of Superhuman, which is a desktop email client. All these features that tend to address some very specific problems, like I want to be able to send a message later, and so you have scheduled send, or I want to be able to track emails, and I want to be able to see whether the recipient has opened my email message. In the case of Spark and other similar email collaboration services, you can collaborate on messages by composing drafts together with other teammates. And that sort of makes email something that it's way different from what the actual email protocol enables. It becomes something more similar to Google Docs experience. Right. And so you have those products, and then you have Gmail, which has really become its own thing. Especially over the past couple of years, they have a custom Gmail API. Now, actually, you can, if you're a developer, you can write a third-party Gmail client that uses an API that is completely separate from standard IMAP. And Gmail itself on the web, not so much on iOS, we're going to talk about that, but on the web, it now has all of these modern features. Like it's got snoozing, it's got scheduled send, it's got plugins. There's a whole marketplace to install extensions for Gmail. This was not possible 2 years ago when we last did our email episode. And so you can install a plugin for Evernote or Slack or Trello in Gmail. And those plugins, they do carry over to the iOS client, to the iOS Gmail app. It's got a confidential mode that prevents other Gmail users from forwarding your email to other people. There's a bunch of things, and of course there's AI responses that Google first tested with Inbox, but Inbox has been discontinued, and that feature, the automatic responses created by AI, have been rolled into Gmail. So Gmail has become its own thing, but of course on the iPad still doesn't support split view, I think, or other modern iPadOS features. Of course, iPadOS is still not out, but I'll be very skeptical if Gmail is going to support multi-window, when iPadOS 13 launches. Then we have everything else. So bunch of clients on the App Store, apps that try to turn your email conversations into message threads that sort of resemble iMessage. You have something like AirMail, for example, that's heavy on customization and third-party app integrations. You have free clients like Edison Mail, which is very popular. Actually, my girlfriend Silvia uses it for some reason. I'm not sure why. We have Outlook, which is kind of popular and very nice looking. There's a lot of options, but really I would, identify, I guess, 4 areas of the email experience. There's the businessy, enterprisey products. There's all the other modern apps. So stuff like Outlook, for example, and Edison Mail, and all these modern email clients with some modern features like snoozing and inbox filtering features and stuff like that. Then there's Gmail, which for me is really a custom email service at this point. And finally, for iOS users, there's Apple Mail, and Mac users, of course, as well.
Right.
Apple Mail, the built-in default free client by Apple, which for a long time has been essentially unchanged. And it very much still looks the same, but for the first time in a few years, in iOS 13 and iPadOS 13, Apple is bringing some, wouldn't say major, but significant changes to Mail, which was surprising to me.
That's right. And I guess I would add a couple other facets to the Mail app problem, and that is, especially on the Mac side. On the Mac side, you also have a whole raft of apps that are basically web wrappers for Gmail.
Ooh,
There are lots of these, and they're all over the place, and you don't find them anywhere but on the Mac for the most part. Then there's an industry of what are effectively plugins for Apple Mail that add functionality that's not there already, but that you can't do that on iOS, so that's also limited to the Mac. And then finally, just to kind of elaborate a little bit on the Gmail API point, if you want to try an app that uses that to see what it's like, it's very basic. But if you go, AirMail has two different email apps now. They've got traditional AirMail and they've got AirMail Zero. And AirMail Zero is it's just a Gmail client, and that's because it's using that API. It's super fast, but it's incredibly basic too. I mean, it doesn't have any of these special features that we've talked about, at least not yet. But that's what it's using, and that's what it gives it a really nice, clean experience. It's very Gmail-like, but you're not going to find things like snoozing, collaboration, and those other things.
Yeah, and I think we've learned over the past couple of years that email, and I mean, we knew this before, but I guess we've seen more and more examples that email is just a complicated market.
Right.
It's not just about receiving and sending messages anymore. There's features that now people expect, even though they're not officially part of the email sending and receiving technology, whether it's, tends to be IMAP these days, but features like snoozing or app integrations or intelligent filters that sort of detect what's important and what's not in your inbox. Those features now most people expect. And you have all of these free choices on the, especially when it comes to the App Store. You have Outlook, you have all these other apps that, you just search for email on the App Store and you will see all of these different free clients. But what we've also learned over the past couple of years is that free price tag often comes at a cost. And that cost for many people can be, the concern of security and privacy.
Right.
And especially because Apple has been, insisting on their idea of your iPhone and your iPad and your Mac are built to be secure and private. I've seen, more and more of our readers and listeners grow increasingly worried and concerned about, when I sign up for a free email client, where is my data actually going? What companies actually has access to my conversations? And so I think that's a good thing of being, more conscious, more deliberate about the free services that you sign up for, especially when a service is about email and your private communications. And so maybe even more so than 2 years ago, in the public arena, I think there's more and more of a conversation around who actually has access to my email when I sign up for one of these quote unquote modern services.
Right.
And there's also the fact that for a small team like Mac Stories, it is undeniable that a service like Spark has some practical benefits that has allowed us to communicate more easily and more quickly, because we can share messages with each other. We don't have to forward them anymore and end up with the ugly syntax in the body of the message. We can comment on messages, and it's really I'm fully aware of the fact that I'm trusting a third-party company and servers somewhere around the world with my private communications and my Google accounts. But also, it's the kind of product that allows me to communicate via using email as the foundation in a way that other email apps don't allow me to. So it's, at the end of the day, it's all about the trade-off of what kind of email experience do you want?
Yeah, something like Spark really does eliminate a lot of friction, and I know that we struggle with that. I guess we don't share a ton of email, but there are probably a few messages a week that maybe come into you or they come into me, and Ryan didn't get them or you didn't get them or whoever didn't get them, and it's just an easy way for us to make sure that everybody's seen it and then talk about who's going to respond or whatever it might be. It's not like we're having long chats at the bottom of any of these emails, but it's usually just coordinating who's going to deal with it, right? So that is really handy. I think the flip side of people being wary of free apps and where their data is stored, though, is that some of these apps have moved to subscription, and Airmail, I think, has very notoriously done that not too long ago, about a month ago, and people are really upset. Now, I think there are right ways and wrong ways to move to subscription, and I don't think Airmail handled that particularly well when they moved to subscription, but it's one of those things where I think users have to kind of evaluate email and understand, am I going to pay the cost and privacy potentially of using a free client, or am I going to be willing to pay a premium in order to get the features that I want? Those are two ways to do it. And I know that you and I have for quite a while now used SaneBox, which the benefit of that is compared to any of these apps is that it's server side. It's a service. It's just a pure web service that handles your email server side and does some of the things that we've been talking about in terms of special features without having to have a particular app, which, I think more than anything, just the ability for that to effectively, what it's doing is it's surfacing emails of people who I've communicated with before. Either I've replied to them or I've sent them an email myself. It takes, newsletters and those kinds of things and shuffles them off to their own kind of look at it later type of folder. They call it Sane Later. And then it has blocking, and they call it the Sane Black Hole, which, unfortunately, I have to use that fairly frequently these days because I get, especially since I handle, advertising for MacStories, I get an awful lot of junk that people are very persistent. And if it's something that I'm not going to do, I don't ever want to deal with it again, it goes into that folder, and then I don't have to unsubscribe to anything. It just goes away. So that to me has been a service that I've, found to be probably one of the most valuable email services that I've added in the last, I probably started using it maybe 4 years ago, something like that. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Monday.com, the tool that simplifies the way teams work together. With Monday.com, not only can you manage work and deadlines, you can also cultivate a culture of transparency so everyone in your company works better together. There are so many great things about Monday.com. It works for teams of any size, from a couple of freelancers on up to huge teams. Since I began trying Monday.com, I've been really happy to find that it works great for our small team at MacStories as well as big companies. It's also easy to use. You can automate your workflows, build boards from scratch, or use their pre-made templates, which I really love as a great way to get up to speed quickly. And you can upload files directly from your computer, Dropbox, or Google Drive. Monday.com helps you stay on track. You can create accountability by assigning tasks to owners, and you'll never miss a deadline with their My Week view, a personal assistant for you and your team. There's even an iOS app, too, that'll keep you going while you're on the go. I'm new to Monday.com, and I've been really happy with it so far, especially the ability to view projects in all sorts of different ways. There's Kanban-style card views, which are similar to things that we've used in the past for our Club MacStories newsletter, and I really have loved using the templates because they make it really simple for me to get up to speed and try new things, like visualizing our timeline for the editorial calendar at MacStories this fall. You can try it out today yourself by going to monday.com/appstories to start a 14-day free trial. That's monday.com/app stories. Go there now and try it out. I think you'll love it. Our thanks to monday.com for their support of App Stories.
So how do you actually, help me understand, how do you actually use email on a daily basis? Like, are you one of those people that files messages in specific folders, or do you just archive and search?
I mostly archive and search. So,
okay.
but I don't archive everything. With email, what I try to do is if it's something that's truly junk, I throw it in the trash, because as much as I want to rely on search, I want to make sure that the results I get back from it are as good as possible. So as a result of that, if it's just junk email, whether it's spam or whether it's, I don't know, some advertisement from some site that I bought something from at some point in the past,
right,
I'll delete those, because who knows, maybe there's a search term in there of something where I legitimately want to find an email from someone that sent it to me, and it'll pull up this ad, and I just don't want to pollute my search results. So the first cut is it totally junk that I'm never going to want again, or is there a potential for wanting to see it again? If there's a potential for wanting to see it again, I archive it, and then I use search. And I typically use search in whatever email client I happen to be using at the time. But if that doesn't work, I always fall back to the Gmail search, because really, I don't think anyone has figured out how to search email as well as Google in terms of both, the speed and the accuracy. So that's always my fallback. So I keep Gmail on my iOS devices, and I use it on the web on my Mac as kind of the last ditch effort to find something I'm having trouble finding for whatever reason in some other app. How about you?
I mostly do the same. I use SaneBox to categorize my email in three main buckets. There's my inbox. There's the Sane Later folder, where sort of unimportant messages go, and then I can decide whether one of those messages I want to promote to the inbox, and SaneBox learns in the feature. So we mentioned this service before. It's a server-side tool that integrates with your Gmail account, and it creates, as you keep using it, it learns whether a contact is important or not. And the third folder is the Sane News, where my newsletters and sort of social communications and updates and all that kind of stuff ends up. I declared email bankruptcy a few weeks ago. I archived messages from my inbox and the Sane Later folder going all the way back to 2016, because I was never going to reply to those messages anyway. And they were just going to make me feel bad. And even if even if I considered the idea of replying to a message from 2016, what do you say to a person that emailed you 3 years ago? Hey, sorry for the late response.
Right.
So I just archived it. I feel really bad about not responding to people, but then again, responding to email is not my job. If I were to spend all my day responding to emails, I would not do, the thing that people know me for in the first place, which is running a website and writing. So I try not to obsess too much over that. And I've been trying to keep a clean inbox ever since I archived everything. And when I'm done with something, or if I don't respond to something, I just archive it. I read all the messages that I receive. I only respond to a subset of them. And if I ever need something, I search for it. And like you, if the search in my email client is not working, I tend to fall back to Gmail, which I keep installed on my iPad and iPhone via the official Google app.
Okay. I'm wondering if you use flagging and pinning at all, because
no.
Interesting. All right. Because in Spark, it's called pinning. But, if you pin an email in Spark, I'm pretty sure that it just ends up as a flagged email in other services. And I have used that a fair amount, especially where I have ongoing conversations with someone who I'm working with. And I've found that it's a very slippery slope where I'll end up with way too many pinned messages, because I forget to unpin them and archive them at some point, and then it just becomes another inbox at some point. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to rethink how I handle those sorts of messages. And one of the most important things for me, aside from kind of the auto categorization that we've talked about with SaneBox, is that I have a way to get things that I need to follow up on out of email. And that, in a lot of email apps, that's integration with a particular service, whether it's something like Todoist or Good Tasks or Reminders or whatever. But I won't use an email app unless there's a convenient way for me to get the information out of it, but also be able to get back to the message in the first place so I can get the context if I need it. And so that has become probably more than anything else the most important aspect of email to me.
Yeah, so the way that I see it is a message is either important or it's not. And if it's important, I either respond right away. So if it's an emergency, I need to act on it right away. Or I save it in my task manager. I don't believe in the idea of creating multiple inboxes in different apps. I don't want to have to think about, and it's really the same reason why I don't keep checklists, for example, in Notes.
Okay.
The things that I have to do go into my task manager. So whether it's a note or whether it's an email or if it's a Safari web page, I don't like the idea of, the notes that I need to work on are saved with the checklist in Notes, and I just want to have a task manager and everything goes in there. But really, again, I should say, I want to use email as little as possible. I don't work in sales. Really all I need to do is a few times a week go through support requests from club members because I really care about those. Those are important. And I go through my inbox, especially if there's like communication from PR people that I need to be in touch with or developers that have sent me a beta of an app that I want to cover. I don't necessarily want to respond to everyone. There's when you write a website, and I don't mean to sound like a terrible person, but it's just what it is. When you write a public website, there's a blog about technology, and I guess that it's the same about video games or music or politics or sports or whatever. People send you a lot of ideas, a lot of feedback, and a lot of comments, and really most of them are bad. When I say bad, I mean they're like a bad fit for my website, for example,
right?
Because maybe they are new readers and maybe they found my article or my site in a Google search, and they don't necessarily know the kind of, policy that I have for stories. And so they send me suggestions. And I don't want to respond saying, no, I disagree with you. I just read the message and archive it or leave it there because I forget about it. And then I go back in there and I archive it. And I used to be very, very, I used to overthink it years ago, but now I feel pretty good about it. Like if something's important, I respond right away. If it's important, but I can do it later, it goes in reminders.
Okay, so even if it's like in the morning, you wake up, you're having breakfast, you see that you got an email that you don't have to deal with it right now, but you do want to kind of deal with it maybe later in the day. You would put that in reminders even if you're going to respond the same day, but not right then?
Oh, yeah, because what I do, and this leads us into, I guess, the topic of this episode is once it's saved in reminders, if it's got a link back to the original message, I archive it. So it's gone from the inbox because in a way I've dealt with it already, right? In the sense that I've put it in my task manager. So when the due date comes up, I will respond. There's going to be a link that takes me back to the message, but otherwise it's out of my sight. I don't have to think about it anymore. The task manager will think about it for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I would say that I try to do that most of the time, but I have found myself kind of stuck in this pin notes world where, and that's one of the things I'm trying to escape.
Don't pin things, John.
I know.
It's like, why?
I know. And I think that leads really well into what we're both really doing right now, which is we're both have returned to Apple Mail. And there's reasons for that. And I think sometimes these extra features like pinning or flagging, I mean, you can flag in Apple Mail too, but sometimes some of that stuff just gets in the way and there are easier ways to deal with this. And I do think, and one of the features that's coming in iOS 13 is the ability to link back to an email from reminders. And that is really powerful. Once I saw that in the beta, I knew that Apple Mail was probably something that I could do going forward. I mean, that's been one of the big I guess, speed bumps or roadblocks to me actually using it in the past. But being able to link back to messages, that's really powerful.
Yeah. So that's basically sort of was the catalyst for my decision to go back to return to Apple Mail and see how it would go. In iOS 13, there's a new sort of hidden feature of Mail that allows you to select some text in a message, hit the share button from the copy and paste menu, and select the reminders extension. And when you do select the reminders extension, the reminder that you will create will have a little mail icon that serves as a dip link back to the original message.
Right.
This feature used to be available only in two ways. On the iPhone, if you used Siri to say, hey, assistant, remind me about this, and this portion of the command would be the email message. And so you would create a reminder with a link back to the message in Apple Mail. Or on the iPad with drag and drop, you could drag a message from Mail into reminders and it would have a deep link as well. But there was no way to do it without voice on the iPhone, without Siri on the iPhone.
Right.
Now you just need to select some text, open the share sheet. That text becomes the note of the reminder. There's a deep link to the message, and the subject of the email is used as the title of the reminder. The beautiful thing about this integration is that even if you archive a message, even if you move folders, because of the way that message deep links work, it doesn't matter what the location of the message is. The system can load a message using a unique identifier that is independent from the location of the message in your account. So that allows me to create a reminder for a message, give it a due date, give it a due time, and then no matter where the message is, as long as it still exists in my email account, tapping the mail icon in reminders will take me to that message. And this, because I've been using reminders for the past year, and I'm using reminders even more now that it's becoming so much more powerful in iOS 13. This was the final the final feature that I needed to try and go back to Apple Mail. Because I'll tell you, John, that I've been missing Apple Mail in the sense of I just want to have an email client that is not creepy, that is fluid and has a native UI and looks good on iOS and it's going to support dark mode as soon as iOS 13 launches, and it's going to support multi-window on iPad when iPadOS launches. And Mail ticks all of these boxes, right? Apple is not running any cloud-based service to sort of scan your email and do weird things to your email. The Mail app is limited, and you can, there's a bunch of things that are wrong with it, and it still doesn't have feature parity with macOS, still cannot do smart folders, still cannot do, rules, for example, but it is fluid. It is very elegant. It is very pretty. It looks like a native iOS app. It supports dark mode out of the box. Its swipe gestures are the most fluid and smooth I've ever seen in any email client.
Yep.
When you want to archive or flag a message or whatever. And it supports all of the new APIs in iOS 13 and iPadOS. It's got multi-window, it's got dark mode, it's got context menus, which are really nicely done. I believe it's got full page capture as well, which, by the way, I got to add to my review because I forgot to mention this. So I will write a reminder for this right away. It is the most native experience for an email client. And for somebody like me who, as you mentioned, we only share and comment on messages in Spark every once in a while. So I can keep Spark as sort of the backup tool for back channel communications. But for my daily experience, I would rather see something like Mail it's clean, it works well with other apps on my devices. And I should also mention, because of how my life has changed over the past few years, I don't care about push notifications anymore. That's just not a thing that is a priority for me anymore at this point in my life. I can open my email client every 2 hours, and then if I see something new, I'll deal with it. Otherwise, I used to obsess over staying on top of email, getting push notifications for something. It's so much better to live life this way if you can afford it.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Pingdom, the company that makes website performance monitoring really easy. Everyone loves a fast website, and Pingdom are helping to keep your favorite sites online. Sites like Netflix, Amazon, Spotify, Twitter, BuzzFeed, and Slack. These are just a few of the companies that trust Pingdom to take care of their website monitoring. Websites can be pretty complicated, and you can monitor any site transaction with Pingdom. Things like user registrations and logins, checkouts, and a whole bunch more. Pingdom cares about your users having the smoothest site experience possible. And if disaster strikes, you'll be the first to know. It's super easy to get started. All Pingdom needs is your URL, and they'll take care of the rest. It's as simple as that. Go to pingdom.com/signup right now for a 14-day free trial with no credit card required. When you sign up, use the code AppStories at checkout to get a huge 30% off your first invoice. Again, that's pingdom.com/signup and the code AppStories for a whopping 30% off. Our thanks to Pingdom for their support of the show. In terms of notifications, I do like Apple Mail's option, and you can find it in that context menu, to notify me. So if there is an important thread that I've got going with someone and I'm waiting for a response, I can get a notification just for that particular response. And for VIPs, I will do that with just a select number of people. But for the most part, yeah, I've got all of the notifications shut off on email. I go in, a few times a day and look at my email, but I do not obsess over keeping up with it minute by minute at all. Between the notify me and VIPs, that's all I really need to keep on top of things that are absolutely critical. Although I will also say that VIPs are totally broken for me right now in the beta. I'm not sure what's going on. I have a bunch of people in my VIPs who shouldn't be there, and when I delete them, they just pop back into mail. I can't get rid of these extra VIPs, and fortunately, they're not people who email me on a regular basis anyway, so it's not like it's causing problems. But I would like to narrow that list down, because that list for me is going to be, fewer than 10 people, and I'd like to be able to do that again. The other thing that I would mention too, that Apple really does make sure that their apps are accessible, and part of accessibility is the ability to change the size of text in apps. And one of the things that has driven me a little crazy about Spark since I've been using it is that you can't change the text size. You can change the font size of the message that you're sending, but you can't change the size of the message that you're viewing. And Apple Mail, you can do that by going into the settings app. And one of the reasons that this is important is not only is my eyesight not great, but on top of that, we're using devices at all sorts of different distances now. The iPad, I think, is a really good example, because a lot of times you may be holding your iPad in your hands relatively close to your face, and the smaller text is totally fine. But then you might attach a keyboard and be holding it out quite a bit further in front of you typing, and it's a lot harder to read those messages. And the ability to kind of change the text size in whatever app you're working in, I find to be, a great feature. I use it in my text editors all the time, because some days, I don't know, my eyes are tired, or I'm holding the iPad further away, or whatever it is. I can change it and adjust it depending on the particular conditions that I'm in. And you can't do that with all of the email clients that are out there.
Mm-hmm. Something that I've been doing lately to sort of work around the lack of smart folders in mail, I set up filters in the Gmail web app, which, by the way, you can now access just fine in iPadOS thanks to desktop class Safari. I set up filters to aggregate messages like newsletters from Club MacStories or newsletters from Emojipedia and that kind of stuff. Those filters, they now show up as mailboxes in Apple Mail.
Nice.
And I customize the sidebar in Mail so that I can have quick access to those mailboxes. And so now every time a new club newsletter comes out, it automatically ends up in my club Mac Stories quote unquote folder, because Gmail is actually doing the server side processing using filters. So it is a way for me to sort of add features to Mail, even though you cannot, of course, create a small folder. But because it's Gmail and everything runs in the cloud, you can just create the rule using Gmail, and it's even better now because in iPadOS Safari it works perfectly well. Actually, you can make the argument that you can now use Gmail in Safari on the iPad, which I have tested, and it's pretty much, wouldn't say perfect, but it's very much usable and almost one-to-one with the accessing Gmail from a Mac. So I think I'm fine with Apple Mail for now. I've really enjoyed the ability to create multiple windows. You can create windows for the message composer. You can open individual messages in, Apple calls them auxiliary windows, which means they are single purpose windows dedicated to that individual message. When you're done with the message, there's a button that says close or done, and it closes the window. So I can open messages in multiple windows. I can pair you can do things like, and I talk about this in my iOS review, you can do things like open a message like a Club Mac Stories newsletter. Try this. Open Mac Stories Weekly in a separate Mail window, and next to it, put a Safari window, like a blank Safari window. And all the links that you open from our Mac Stories Weekly newsletter will open in that window on the right side of the screen. And so you just created a Club Mac Stories workspace. You created a Mac Stories Weekly workspace to read the email on the left side and check out all the links and all the apps and all the articles that we link to on the right side, that's exactly one of the benefits of multi-window on iPad, and Mail supports all of these by default.
That's a great idea. I guess the one other thing I would mention about Mail that I'm trying right now, and I'm not really convinced this is going to stick or not, is that I have physically separated my work and my personal emails into different apps.
Okay.
So with my personal Gmail account, I have moved that to just use the Gmail app because, especially when I'm looking at a unified inbox, I don't too much of my, I try to manage my Mac Stories email more carefully to keep the junk out of my inbox. But it's just too much to also do that with my personal Gmail, where I end up with all kinds of advertisements for sites that I've bought things from and that sort of thing. And yeah, I'll go through every now and then and I'll unsubscribe to a bunch of that. But it's just like, I don't know, tons of emails from my kids' school and other stuff that's like, it's, notifications from my bank, whatever it is. None of them are things that hardly ever need to be done right away. And so by keeping them in a separate app, I can go to that app once a day or every other day, and it's totally fine. I don't need to be in there as much. And then it's also not kind of diluting and polluting the inboxes that I have on Apple Mail. So that's something I'm giving a try. And it's just too early to know if it will stick. I had a lot of problems, especially on iOS with the betas early on with Apple Mail. It was one of the apps that was probably the roughest for me. It seems like that has settled down to a large degree. So a lot of this for me is an experiment that's only been going on for really a few weeks in earnest lately, because before that I had kind of set everything up, but then fell back to my old systems just because Apple Mail was having some troubles. But yeah, it's coming along at this point. Okay, Federico, I think we'll have more to say on email in the future. I think we'll always have something to say about email, because as much as I'm enjoying this new system that I've set up, which is awfully similar to what you're doing, I feel like there's always tweaks that can make it a little bit better. And part of that is just that I think email is awful in general, and there's always something that can be fixed a little better. I want to thank our two sponsors for this episode. That's Pingdom and Monday.com. You can find me and Federico over at MacStories.net, where we're writing all the time. And you can find Federico over on Instagram and Twitter. He's at Viticci, that's VITICCI, and I'm at John Voorhees on both, JOHN VOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.